Thanks for chatting today, Cruz. I'd like to take a few minutes to learn about your experience teaching a couple of versions of multimodal writing courses at the Bread Loaf School of English and the Santa Fe campus. Well, I know your courses at Bread Loaf have been super popular, and I'm pretty sure one of the reasons they're so well received is that teachers feel a lot of connection to their work, to the heart of their work. And you have both private and public school teachers from the U.S., from abroad, who are certainly challenged to communicate through media in which they may not be completely at home. So my first question is, why ask graduate students who are educators to compose in audio or infographics or digital video, for instance?
Sure. Yeah, and I think one of the things I try to do at the beginning of all my courses, of course, ask, what students hope to get out of that, the class experience, because it's 6 weeks and it's very, very tight. So I kind of want to know, like, what are we hoping to get out of this class? And I think one of the sentiment that I've heard that's sort of been repeated a few times is this idea of, like, we want to make our use of technology meaningful, which I think is a really great goal and aim, and something that I try to bring each course. And so I think what I've noticed is that, from hearing about student teacher experiences, that oftentimes they're presented with these new media or these new technologies in classes, and sort of, given to them sometimes from the top down, and they have no idea how it fits into their curriculum or their pedagogy. So I think, by asking the students to compose, infographics, audio, podcasts, video, it really sort of, allows them to experiment, and oftentimes these low stakes sort of assignments, see, what actually does seem to connect with what are some of their existing pedagogical practices already, what is something that they could see also fitting into their curriculum. And I think some of the really great projects that you've even highlighted on the Bread Loaf Journal, I think a couple years ago, had the video by a student, Raja, and she did a great one where she'd already done this naming activity with her students. And so her video, did a great job of really, translating that and bringing that into the video form. And you're able to really, see how sort of powerful it was to see these images of her as a young child sort of into an adult. And so I think that's really meaningful for me too, when I see how students are able to really connect it with, activities they're already doing and assignments that they already find really meaningful too. So I think by asking them to do that, they can see perhaps where hopefully something we're doing in the class does fit or reinforce something they're already working on too.
Yeah, I've in reviewing some of the work from the perspective of the Bread Loaf Teacher Network, it's just, and I've dropped into your class before on the Santa Fe campus, and when you say low stakes assignment, it feels safe as people are edging into these media that they're not particularly familiar with in some cases, and yet I've seen resonance where teachers are finding public audiences, whether it's to play at an open house, as a welcome to introduce the teacher, or as you say with Raj, she later did a podcast about creating that piece. And so it seems like there's some pairing of accessibility and audience that runs through some of the work. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think, something that's definitely come up more this past year was this question of accessibility. One of the students in the class, happened to be a disabilities resource staff person at their school. And so it was part of these initial discussions. We heard about this, and it sort of prompted this idea where, as I was looking at some of the assignments or some of the readings that came later in the quarter or later in the summer, I was thinking, maybe we could swap something out that address more this issue of accessibility, because that is definitely something that I think is really comes this intersection. And I found that, the student who was already doing this work in disability resource, she had a lot of connections with this idea of, like, multimodal, in terms of thinking of, like, how can we, work with students who engage or who have these different abilities and are able to communicate better, across different media, or who respond and learn better through these different, tactile and different teaching methods that I think that we don't always consider beyond sort of the written page. So I think having that sort of, thinking about these different audiences is definitely something that's come up. And I think it's great, because then it also sort of amplified, I think, the thoughts and practices of all the other students in the class too.
So it sounds like it's a constantly recursive process, teaching and getting feedback from students and seeing where they take it. So you've mentioned you've done a little bit of changing, tweaking the course midstream last summer, as far as that accessibility strands goes. What other ways, based on either scholarship or different research or pedagogical interests of the class, have you found yourself tweaking the various versions of the class?
Yeah, so I think the first time I taught the course, it was funny because I was we had a lot of discussion about just sort of the initial article that talked about sort of doing these teaching philosophy across a visual medium. And so fortunately, I knew a few of the authors on this article. So I had one of them who I communicated with offered to Skype in. So we Skyped into the class and we were able to ask, or the students were able to ask some of these questions they had about, lingering questions about sort of, doing this. And so it was good too, because I think when they were able to talk to the author, the researcher of this, the person sort of let them know too, hey, we were sort of experimenting going through this as well. So I think some of maybe their own potential sort of nervousness about engaging in this kind of, new genre was something that they were sort of really sort of met with saying, this is okay to have this feeling right now too, because this, in fact, was a feeling of people who were doing it in something that became a published, piece of scholarship. So I think that's maybe sort of a nice sort of view behind the curtain, as it was. I try to sort of be as responsive as I can be in that moment, just thinking about, like coming in with, of course, wanting to answer these questions, have my own goals for the course, but then also making sure we're answering and responding to like what are the interests of the students, and then hopefully all those are overlapping as best they can. And then for the folks who are just kind of like, hey, I want to sort of get sort of my feet wet with some of this stuff because I'm asked to do a lot of technology stuff back at my, home school. It's like there's plenty of opportunity, I think, for that too.
Well, I know the day that I dropped in, it wasn't long at all before I was outside recording a podcast with a couple of classmates, and took the stigma or the resistance away from that activity. And we were reading theoretical pieces from Ball, I believe, at that time too. So appreciate that dynamic. Last summer, speaking of educators, we had you had Alfredo Lujan and Rexley Jim in the course. How did having two experienced Bread Loaf Teacher Network leaders and educators impact the class?
I mean, just from my own perspective as a professor, I was really inspired, of course, because they're both of them came to the class, I think, with sort of the same perspective that they both work with young people, or Alfredo's still teaching. I think Rexley said he's working in a different position with young people still too. But it's one of those things where they are not just saying, oh, I really wish I knew, what the younger students were doing and I want to be able to help. They were saying like, okay, I'm going in, I'm jumping in the deep end right now because I want to make sure that I'm bringing this in and I'm really keeping what my own practices, I think, for, Alfredo's perspective, like relevant. And, for Rexley saying like, I want to be able to not just say like, tell these, young people what I think they should do with a video, but also understand the amount of effort and labor and everything that goes into the work they're doing. So I think it's this really, I think, great exchange that they're sort of offering, sort of ready to sort of humble themselves to say like, hey, I don't understand this. And I want to sort of put in the work that's necessary and able to understand what I'm asking students to do, or to be able to ask students to bring in, these new ideas, these new techniques, and then be ready to help them on sort of the other side too. That's one of the things we know about, people with technology. It's like, you ask somebody like, are you good at it? Most people will just kind of say, no, I'm not good at it. But you get 3 or 4 of those people together and you kind of recognize like, okay, everybody's kind of farther along, or everybody's sort of somewhere along the spectrum of knowing or having had more experience. So when you kind of get them all together, they tend to be able to learn from each other. And I think that's kind of what we saw in the classroom dynamic. And I think that was, once again, sort of really inspirational, and also kind of like helped us sort of reaffirm and re-articulate and make sure that we were saying something, that it was sound and sort of what the end goal was going to be for it too.
Yeah, I think that taps into a long tradition of teacher as writer at Bread Loaf, and yourself, your students are constantly learning from the pedagogy you're enacting. Whether it's the way you're revising in process, or giving them that kind of felt experience with the medium. So I wanted to ask, what are some of the ways that the setting of Santa Fe itself can contribute to or reinforce concepts raised in the course?
Yeah, I mean, so Santa Fe, of course, really beautiful place, and it has like a really rich tradition of having all those art galleries and museums and things like that. So I think two of the places I really love about Santa Fe, I think my favorite places are Meow Wolf and the American Indian Arts Museum downtown. And Meow Wolf is one of those cool places that, I mean, once you've been there, you sort of understand. It's one of those cool places we actually go off in time with the program itself, and it's sort of this immersive artistic installation experience, and it's all connected through this non-linear storytelling that happens by going through this like house that's there, but then there's secret passageways in the house, and then you end up kind of up in the rafters and moving along, and there's all kinds of lighting and video games and weird things happening in there that I like to tell students, like, this is really a great example of not just sort of this multimodal, multimedia sort of collaboration, but it's also really hits on like when something's really effective with digital media, like we say, like it's immersive, and so like, of course, when you're walking through this art installation, there's no way you can't feel that you're immersed in this experience. And so I think like, just with like hearing things and seeing things and being able to like pick up headsets and put them on, sort of like piece this whole story together, or just sort of experience these different little pieces in different ways and not try to put the story together. Like you come away with just sort of this like at least there's that, on the base level, there's just that aesthetic experience, but then if you want to put it together, think like, extrapolate later, talk to people about it. Like, what were you supposed to be getting from that? Like, I sat in this room and you opened up something and there were some creepy things there. And it was just this past summer that we did have one of my class sessions. We went to the American Indian Museum of Art there. In downtown. It was great because we had a docent who gave us a tour, and we were thinking about, like, we read this article by Angela Haas where we're thinking about visual rhetoric, digital pedagogy, American Indian sort of influenced, and so she's arguing for thinking about curation and all these things that we like. Are we asking about the kinds of museums we're at? So the fact we were at this museum that's linked to I think it's a school, the American Indian Arts Institute. And so it's one of those where you could see that they're really having these conscious practices about the curation they do. And so that was something cool, again, to see like not only the compelling artwork, but also to see like, the compositions across different media that they're using as well. And so, I think, as students who are asking to be creative in, solving problems with creating these new visual videos or infographics, I think it's also good to be exposing them to these pieces that are visually compelling, and also challenging them and hopefully inspiring them by putting them in these spaces where you're able to sort of hopefully become inspired. And I think even a few students took pictures while we were there, and then those found their way into their teaching philosophies that they were mediating into videos as well. So I think that's been a cool thing. I think I'm going to try and bring into my class next year as well.
It kind of puts it in perspective just how long non-alphabetic literacies have been around us, but probably not so much in the school literacy repertoire. So yeah, it sounds really intriguing. And it does sound like we'll have a lot of teacher network activity at the Santa Fe campus this summer. Any hints of coming attractions for the summer work from your perspective?
At the very least, I'm going to be pushing for the Meow Wolf, and I will be incorporating my own trips. But I think, I'm always excited to see what the new crop of students or the returning students we're going to get, because I think, they have great perspectives, the students who've been there, and knowing what some of these great activities are, and at the same time, responding to the students who come in and stay, have these different experiences at different places they've been teaching at, that can help sort of inform, like, think about, okay, what can I change and what could I also bring that's gonna, meet the students where they're at, and hopefully help them fulfill their goals for the summer, and leave us all leaving Bread Loaf excited and ready to take on the class that may or may not be starting in a week or two, because I know we have plenty of students on the year-round or the near year-round, it seems like.
and somehow you all as faculty keep us all energized. So I appreciate the conversation. I look forward to seeing how the work evolves this summer, and I wish you the best in the spring, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Cruz.